Due to climate change, since these things have become a lot more variable, it's important to diversify to other forms of renewable energy. Private sector wants profit. If private sector is not going to make profit, they're not going to come. We think Ethiopia is huge, 130 million people, massive opportunity. We encourage actually companies to reinvest their profits locally. I think when you look at the bigger picture, it's a country, one of the best opportunities in the world is in Ethiopia for investment. And your return on investment is just unbounded because there's not a lot of players. Ethiopia's installed capacity was around 3,000 megawatts before GERD. And it's gonna effectively triple just by bringing GERD. The biggest issue is this dichotomy of how much I'm selling it and how much the buyer can buy or is willing to buy. Because if we don't create a market, it's not going to work.
Today on our forum, we're joined by Hizkyas Dufera, energy advisor with over 18 years of experience spanning the aerospace and power sectors. Hizkyas advised Ethiopia's Ministry of Water and Energy and key sector leaders on national electrification, power sector reforms, and strategies to attract private investment. In his capacity as an advisor, he participated in integrated planning and off-grid project developments to support the launch of independent power producers and power purchase agreement negotiations. He previously served as a senior advisor to the World Bank and led renewable energy initiatives at Ocean Power Technologies. Welcome to Lugal Forum, Hizkyas.
Thank you.
Could you please briefly tell us about your previous roles and responsibilities at Ministry of Water and Energy? How did your roles contribute to shaping the country's broader energy sector reforms?
I'm actually now at the Ministry of Irrigation and Lowlands. I'm the external advisor to the Ministry of Irrigation and Lowlands. But prior to that, I was advising the Ministry of Water, Irrigation and Energy. So I come from the private sector. I worked mostly in first in aerospace, designing systems for jet fighters and commercial airlines, especially control systems. And then I went into renewable energy, working on wave energy systems. And then had my own company in the US where we were building battery systems for the US Navy. And then in 2018, towards the end of 2018, at the request of the then Minister, Dr. Seleshi Bekele, I came to Ethiopia to support the reform of the energy sector. Then been working since in that field. Mainly working on off-grid systems. We started the mini grid initiative in Ethiopia, which actually now is going global, which is quite happy about. We did about 12 mini grid pilots, which were quite successful. From design inception to commissioning was like 18 months. It was quite a fast initiative. Following that, we actually were able to raise the Adele program, which became the country's off-grid scale-up initiative, up to 250 villages and towns with mini grids and some smaller systems. So that's ongoing. That's been going for the last, 4 years or so, 3.5 years. So a lot of people that don't have electricity are getting electricity because of that initiative. But then, energy has a challenge in Ethiopia, which is the tariffs are very low. So it's not commercially viable. I also helped finalize the National Electrification Program for Ethiopia, the policy initiative. And in that, we need anywhere from $6 to $7 billion to achieve universal electrification. So where do we get this money, right? Adele is $400 million. It's not even 10% of what we need. So, so what we asked one of our donors to help us design a model that could be sustainable, which is we looked at the landscape and we said, okay, 95% of the people that don't have electricity are farmers. And farmers use this equipment called pumps for irrigation. It's diesel-based, requires energy. So we said, what if we merge electricity access with the productive use of the farmers, which is irrigation? So we developed a model. And energy is subsidized anywhere between 75 to 80% in Ethiopia. So off-grid energy is even more subsidized because the cost base is higher as opposed to the grid electricity. So when we developed that financial model, we went from 80 plus percent subsidy to 25, 30%, 35% IRR. So we said, okay, so we need to really work on productive use of energy. And that's where the term pure productive use of renewable energy came from. And that's become now the new initiative in Ethiopia and also across the continent.
Interesting. In January 2024, Ethiopia became the first country in the world to implement a nationwide ban against importation of gasoline and diesel-powered vehicles, a bold and unprecedented policy move. The government justified that this decision was part of its broader strategic goals to curb environmental pollution and also implement sustainable transportation sector. How do you assess such a far-reaching and bold decision of the government, which is unmatched globally in its scope and ambition? And what do you see as the potential benefits and risks of this decision?
Since I came to this country, actually, it's the best policy decision for the country because, first of all, it didn't come soon enough. It should have happened a couple of years earlier because I was advocating for it. I've been driving an electric vehicle since 2016, so I know the benefits of electric vehicles. They're much better cars, and also they're extremely beneficial for the environment. So this two-pronged, right? Ethiopia spends more than $4 billion a year to import fuel. So in addition to the environmental benefits, you're actually replacing, you're doing huge import substitution. And when you look at the other side of the spectrum, Ethiopia's electricity, almost 100% is renewable energy. We use hydro, we have some winds, and solar is also a huge potential for this country. So when you look at it, you're going from investing billions of dollars in the effects that you don't have on fuel towards using your own electricity. That makes the roads safer because electric cars are much more safer than fuel cars, and also they are much better cars in terms of performance. They're more reliable. Like I said, I've been driving an electric vehicle for a while, and I've yet to go to a garage to get it fixed. It doesn't require nearly any maintenance. You just have to put the washer fluid to wash your windshield. So the benefits are enormous, and also the cost of transportation drastically reduces. Fuel cost is about 100 something per liter, 112 I think last I checked. But you look at electricity cost, it's like maximum $3, so $3 per kilowatt hour. So when you compare the cost, it's almost 1/10 the cost of transportation per kilometer when you compare it to fuel. So across the board, it's really the best policy decision for the country.
Yes, especially in terms of conserving the foreign currency reserves of the country and relieving the country from this huge economic burden in terms of transportation costs.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You've involved in the many grid and solutions in different forms. Ethiopia has already demonstrated strong commitment to expand its power generation capacity, spanning solar, hydro, geothermal, and hydroelectric powers. Using both commercial competitive bidding and also public-private partnerships. Different projects are already ongoing in geothermal, Tulumoye, Aisha, and even the Metara solar projects show this commitment. How is the government's IPP strategies balancing between risk allocation, sectoral diversification, and at the same time, private sector participation in the renewable energy sector?
Very good question. Actually, that's what I tried to do the first 3 years I was here. I have a little bit more pivoted now towards agriculture because we think that's where the huge potential is in terms of we have 70% of the workforce that can be more productive using energy. But when we come to our energy landscape, we are predominantly hydro. So I remember in 2021, I think, if I'm not mistaken, or 2020, we had drought, and so the water levels went down. So what happened was there was like basically the electricity was being rationed, and we used to have outages at night, and some people get it during the day. So that shows the risk of lack of diversification. Since then, it's been the opposite. The dams are all full. We're able to fill GERD much faster than we anticipated. So, due to climate change, since these things have become a lot more variable, it's important to diversify to other forms of renewable energy. Luckily, Ethiopia is endowed with a substantial amount of renewable energy resources. Like I said, we have hydro. That's the one we know the most, we use the most. But wind is huge. Solar, of course, we get 13 months of sunshine is our motto here. We get a lot of sunshine. And we're also close to the equator, so our irradiance per square meter is significantly higher. So if in European countries install a solar system or a solar farm versus here, the throughput is significantly higher here. So solar is a huge opportunity. Geothermal, I actually helped negotiate the geothermal, the Tulumoye and Corbeti deals. We have 15,000 megawatts of geothermal, up to 15,000 megawatts. If we can develop these energy resources that we have, we become energy secure. Not only that, energy is directly proportional to economic development. If you look at the two most developed or largest economies in the world, China and the U.S., they have the largest install base when you look at power. So the more install base you have, the more productivity you generate, the more economic activity you generate. So we need to work on our generation capacity, but that's not enough. We have to also invest on our transmission lines and also the last mile distribution and the last mile connection. So it needs to be strategically planned so that we are evacuating the power that we're generating. Because if we don't do that, then the investments get stuck, and we will have excess capacity that we cannot deliver to our customers. So very important that we diversify, but also we have to reform the sector, because one of the things we're struggling with is, like I said in the beginning, energy is not commercially viable for private sector to engage. Right? Our tariffs are very low. Our tariffs are run anywhere from 2 to 3 cents per kilowatt hour in dollar terms. Our cost reflective tariff is anywhere from 8 to 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So there's no economic incentive for private sector to come unless the government provides sovereign guarantee, which was attempted on the geothermal deal, and that's not sustainable, right? Like, we should not be using up our sovereign window for every project. So what we need to do is start reforming the energy tariff, specifically indexing it with FX, because what happens is we're reforming it. So we reform it on a yearly basis. The price is being adjusted, but also there is the devaluation aspect. So the price, the basically the reform is not catching up with the actual devaluation. So it's really important to index it in U.S. dollars as we reform to get to cost-reflective tariffs, which will bring in lots of interest from private sector investors and capital to whether it's transmission, distribution, and also generation capacity development.
The Power Sector Reform Investment and Modernization in Ethiopia, which is a prime program which has been launched in April 2024, which I think tries to address some of the points that you've just raised, which was launched with an initial financial capacity of around $520 million from World Bank and the government, tries to address the modernization of the grid, the tariff reforms, and also the private sector participation in different forms, which aligns with the broader energy sector reforms. How do you think the financial support and structural reforms which have been embedded in this prime program would support the country in modernizing or in resolving the electricity infrastructure problems, and also improve the operational efficiency of the power sector, and what mechanisms have been implemented in this prime program to improve or for this program to accelerate the private sector participation in especially in the renewable energy sector?
Very good question. I am aware of the Prime program, but I don't know the details of intricacies. Like I said, over the last 3 years, I've shifted towards agriculture because we think there's a huge opportunity to focus on productivity of our farmers and merge it with energy. So the working on energy agriculture nexus is what I've been working on. But I think the rehabilitation and modernization is critically important. I think we have seen it in Addis at least. There is significant investment in modernizing our infrastructure. You can see the poles are like cement poles. We have insulated lines to protect them against any shorts or trees falling and causing disruption. So also, I think there's plenty of good quality equipment when you look at transformers, feeder lines, and all of that. So that's excellent. Again, I'm not aware of the details of the Prime program, but it really needs to address the core of the issue, which is reforming the tariff structure, because if something is not commercially viable, private sector wants profit. If private sector is not going to make profit, they're not going to come. So, but it needs to be strategic. We cannot put all the burden on the consumer, but it needs to be strategic so that we can leapfrog and build modern systems, because we're still about 50% electrified. That's why I think mini-grid became super attractive, because you're not investing huge amount of dollars on transmission lines and distribution lines. Basically, you're generating the power there and then also delivering it at that location. So that reduces your cost, number one. Number two, the time to actually do it. I mean, you can finish a mini-grid project within a few months. But if you have to do, build a dam, build a transmission line, build a distribution line, you're looking at 5 to 10 years minimum. So really we need to look at not just modernizing and rehabilitating the grid, but how do we look at our energy supply. Like, for example, globally, there is something called demand-based tariff. Electricity in most of the world is cheaper when demand is low, and it's more expensive when demand is high, meaning peak time. For example, like in the morning or nighttime when there's a lot of activity, when people are using a lot of electricity, the price is higher. So people are incentivized to actually do things at nighttime when the load drops. When you look at the load profile of our grid, our national grid in Ethiopia, it's similar. Nighttime load is very low. You're looking at almost 1/5 of the daytime load. So we need to we need to start looking at a demand-based tariffs so we can incentivize companies to run their operations at nighttime when the load is low. Because you've built this infrastructure, you want to utilize it as much as possible. You don't want to have the peak to average ratio to be significant, right? What you want to do is you want to have as much as possible a flat curve that utilizes 80-90% of your infrastructure. But right now, maybe we're using 50%, and at nighttime it might drop to like 20% of the capacity. So not only the tariff reform, but I think also we need to look at the structure of the demand-based tariff, because that incentivizes people to actually shift their loads to a time frame when the electricity is cheaper. Everybody's incentives work, right? If something is cheap at night, I'll start using that. Another aspect I think that's also important is like in most countries, I think in developed countries, there is something called feed-in tariff. People put solar panels on their roofs, and they can sell electricity to the grid, and also they can supply themselves, because that reduces the burden from the grid, at least during the day, and they can supply when that power is not available. That's also a critical aspect that should be thought about, because it's simple. You can put these meters. They basically, what it does is it gives you credit when you sell, and then basically it runs the other way when you buy. So that way you're actually generating electricity for yourself first, and then if it's excess, you can supply it to the grid. So there's many things that can be done. Of course, prioritization is very important, but and also if people are told that they have an ability to actually sell electricity, they will invest. And also any power cuts could be avoided because they're supplying their own electricity. So lots of things to be done, but of course you can't do everything at once, so it's good to prioritize and get them done in a fashion that actually makes sense for the country.
It's true that the energy sector has historically heavily relied on public financing and donor funding projects instead of making the sector a commercially viable energy sector. But we've seen recent reforms, energy sector reforms, to shift this structure to more commercially viable structure, and also to attract foreign and domestic investors in the energy sector. You've mentioned most of the projects which are public service and at the same time commercially viable structures. Could you please tell us more a bit in detail on how it's realistic to implement a commercially viable energy structure given our country's context, economic context, and the forex reserve issues that has been a significant challenge for the energy sector, especially in our context, in our country? How realistic it is, and how we would be able to attract investors in this renewable energy sector area?
It's also a great question. You actually have really, really good questions. So I will divide it into like medium to short term and long term, right? Medium to short term, so the opportunity is really focusing on productivity, because look at the opportunity of where people are using diesel or fossil fuels, transportation, agriculture. And I think private sector companies kind of basically focus on those areas, specifically agriculture, in terms of permanent infrastructure is very appealing because we have irrigation schemes, and that's actually why I went to really learn about irrigation and agriculture and it's also the biggest addressable market. You have 70-80% of the population. They're paying. Actually, when you go to the rural areas, here in Addis, fuel is about 112 per liter. When you go to the rural areas, they cannot buy from the gas stations. So they end up paying anywhere from 200 to 300 per liter because they have to buy it from aftermarket. And it's also not legal. If they get caught, they get in trouble. So they're in a very precarious situation. So if we can deploy renewable energy for these farmers, first of all, we can increase their productivity drastically because we can also, one of the things that we're looking at is actually we're developing a program called CRISP, Climate Resilient Irrigation for Sustainable Production. We define climate resilience as two prongs. One is adaptation, the other one is mitigation. So what we want to do is we have a lot of schemes that are powered by diesel. We want to convert those into solar, number one. And number two, we want to bring in water efficient technologies. So you bring in the adaptation part so that you use less water, you're not over watering, you're giving it exactly what it needs because you bring in the technology that can do that. And then also a mechanism where farmers pay a lot less than they're currently paying using diesel systems. So that makes energy viable. And it's totally financeable with debt and equity. And also their cost of production drastically reduces, which means the cost of food, which we're seeing yearly inflation in food, drastically drops. So we think that's the biggest opportunity. And also these people get access to electricity. They don't have access to electricity because it's already built there. We're thinking about including access to water supply because you've already taken the water out when you do irrigation. You can do a little bit of filtration and water treatment if needed, and then they can get clean drinking water. And also people will come out of poverty. People can farm 3 times a year, 4 times a year in certain cases. So, because most of our farmers are rain-fed. They wait for Kramt and they do their tapes and Sundays and that's it. So this will enable them to actually be productive throughout the year. So we think that's the biggest opportunity for private sector to engage in. We're working on something called ISPs, Irrigation Service Providers. People can become those and then basically run this operation, collect the tariffs, and provide those services so that we get high quality, low cost food for our community and also empower our smallholder farmers.
Have you already started implementing these initiatives, and to what extent are they practically successful?
We haven't started it. We have started the appraisal of the program. So we expect the program to start next year.
2026.
2026. The first one is, of course, funded by development partners. But we think in the future it can self-sustain itself because we think there is a lot of productivity there. Farmers spent, we've interviewed a lot of farmers, especially the ones that supply Addis and the bigger metropolitan areas. They spend anywhere from 500,000 to 600,000 per on a 4-hectare farm for diesel fuel only. So, as the person said in the past, that's huge opportunity, right? And currently, the schemes are not really operating at the full capacity that they should be. So if those get rehabilitated, if we can reduce that cost by 50%, it will make the schemes totally sustainable, not just operation-wise, but capex. We're looking at full capex recovery, which really is a game changer in terms of making our food supplies resilient and sustainable.
Will this also involve the private sector, or is it going to be fully funded by the government or the development partners?
The first phase will be funded by development partners. Basically, it's a rehabilitation and modernization of the schemes to renewable energy powered and also water efficient technologies mostly. And then what we want to do subsequently is, even in this one, we will try some, basically creating some facilities where private sector could invest in some of the rehabilitation, if possible. Because it's always good to have skin in the game for someone to actually make sure that they deliver. So we're in the early stages. Of course, we'll have much more clarity as we go along, but we want to use some of this soft money that we're getting from development partners to actually create a de-risking mechanism, so that will give us leverage to bring in private sector to play. Because if we put in that guarantee mechanism, then the investor will have a much bigger appetite to invest in something. It's quite new. We haven't done this before, but we think it has the biggest potential.
Yeah. But is it going to be a middle scale project, or do you think it will be a large scale project? Because the challenge that we're seeing with the guarantees, the forex regime, and the political risk and every problem that we're seeing on the energy sector would also be applicable for these initiatives as well, if it's going to be a large scale project. But maybe it might be useful to consider a middle scale or small scale projects so that they can be financed at equity and debt easily and attract private sector for these initiatives as well.
Yes, so we're gonna. I mean, the program is large, but we'll be dividing them into chunks of smaller projects, so that we really like local companies to invest first, because our biggest challenge is we have it's obvious, right? We have significant trade deficit. We export 4 billion, we import 20 billion, so 16 billion has to come from somewhere. So that problem is not going to get solved overnight. We have to be practical. We have to be pragmatic. So for us to say, okay, we will give you repatriation, we'll guarantee repatriation, it does not make sense. But we think there's a huge potential locally for people to actually invest. And we will create it in such a way that local investment will be possible, specifically on the soft stuff. I think CapEx, of course, needs, most of the CapEx needs FX, but there's lots of this capacity building, there's operations, maintenance, all of that can be done on local currency. So it would be like a hybrid model. But we would like to really encourage local private sector companies to engage, because first of all, people who have passion in this area, they will weather the storm, and also we'd like to hear back from private sector stakeholders to say, what will make you invest in this area? It's very important to hear from them, because it's not just profit. What are some of the other incentive mechanisms that will, that will encourage you to invest? We'll make it a two-way communication, and then have the products, the de-risking mechanisms in place, so that if there's any issue, there is some sort of guarantee that will help them keep moving. But again, I think, we're not limiting it to local companies. Foreigners can come as well. But it's very difficult for us to now say, I will give you, guarantee repatriation, because we think Ethiopia is huge, 130 million people, massive opportunity. We encourage actually companies to reinvest their profits locally, and and eventually I think will be sufficient enough where we'll start exporting. You'll make your money then, because we have priorities, right? There's medicine, critical needs that the country needs to invest on. So for us to say, of course, now with the macro, we have some liberalization of the FX. So you combine the FX from the market and repatriate it. That's already in place, which was not possible before. National Bank allows also offshore accounts. You can create offshore accounts. So all these things, all the reforms are coming. But I think when you look at the bigger picture, it's a country, one of the best opportunities in the world is in Ethiopia for investment. And your return on investment is just unbounded because there's not a lot of players. So my message is come and invest. Don't worry about this repatriation stuff. It will come. Come for the long term, not just to make a buck and leave. I think that will make it a lot more attractive.
Interesting. We very much look forward to seeing this on the ground being implemented. Coming back to the energy sector, you've mentioned that the National Bank has enacted a new directive in July 2024, and PPP projects and infrastructure projects to open offshore account, and for payments such as debt servicing, contractors' payments, insurance payments, and other operational expenses to be settled directly from the offshore account. It has also introduced foreign currency convertibility guarantee, which is a remarkable shift in the energy sector because it will address many of the challenges that the previous renewable energy sector projects were having. To what extent has this directive impacted the bankability of the renewable energy projects and the attractiveness of the sector, the renewable energy sector, for private sector investment?
I think, this was when we were actually working on the Corbette and Tolomoye deals. It's definitely an important step that the country has taken. The reform, I think, will pay dividends in a very short amount of time. The offshore account is very critical because debt servicing is one of the requirements for bankability. Also, I think the liberalization of the FX, because it can also, not just on the big infrastructure projects, but even for people who are investing in other areas, getting access to the FX is very important. But I think when it comes to renewable energy, I still come back to the reform tariff issue, because who's the off-taker? Who's buying your electricity, right? It's Ethiopian Electric Power, because Ethiopian Electric Power buys that energy, sells it. Right now, they generate their own electricity. Their cost base is zero, right? So if they, let's take, for example, geothermal. Geothermal is anywhere from 7 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour. Our retail tariff is 2 cents per kilowatt hour. So there is before you even get to, so tariff is divided into three, right? You have the generation tariff, transmission tariff, and distribution tariff. When you add those three, you have your retail tariff. Yes. So our retail tariff is less than the generation tariff of most of these renewable energy sources, specifically when you look at geothermal and wind. Solar is more attractive because some countries have achieved 2 cents or less per kilowatt hour. We think that would be an area where private sector companies could come in and invest, because it's a lot more attractive from a pricing perspective. It doesn't put undue burden on the power sector to sell at a loss, because, like I said, the retail tariff is quite low. So I think maybe we'll start with solar, because the cost, the generation tariff is quite low, and then we'll gradually go to the wind. I think is next in geothermal. That's where I see things are coming. But again, two things are very important. First, we have to index our tariffs in USD. We don't have to charge people in USD, but it's indexing it on an annual basis in FX because we build our infrastructures in FX. Our tariffs are indexed in local currency. There is a big mismatch there. And number two is we need to start implementing these demand-based tariffs. Very, very important. We need to incentivize people to flatten the electricity for their curve. We cannot have like peaks of during the day and then just nothing at night. The adoption of electric vehicles will solve this to a certain extent because people charge their cars at nighttime. So nighttime loads will pick up, which is good. But that also needs to be coordinated because that could also, if everybody's charging at the same time, that could also put a huge burden on the grid. So, lots of things, but it needs to be thought of as a wholesome, as we see our energy security. Another thing is also we need to have a baseload. Baseload is like basically a load that you need to have 24/7 uninterrupted to make sure that your critical infrastructures are powered. So, hydro is serving as a baseload right now. But when we look at hydro, I'm getting a little bit in the technical details now. It has a capacity factor. So energy, when you deploy energy, you have something called capacity factor. Hydro is can go anywhere from 30 to 50, 60%, depending on how much water reservoir that you have in the head of that dam. So, but when you look at geothermal, for example, it's 95 to 100% capacity factor. That means it will deliver its installed capacity 100% of the time. Sometimes even more than 100% because they undersize the plant, but the resource is more. So, so we need to develop these baseload infrastructures because if something happens, at least your critical infrastructure to run your, important economy is always going. So, in addition to the increasing the capacity, economically secured power supply is very important because that's the first thing that you have to do is your main critical loads have to be powered.
You've mentioned the need to increase the financial capacity of state-owned enterprises in order to attract private investment to the renewable energy sector. In February 2025, Ethiopia has signed a memorandum of understanding with Africa Trade Insurance Agency to be a beneficiary of the Regional Liquidity Support Facility. This Regional Liquidity Support Facility provides protection to the investors to facilitate timely payments from state-owned enterprises to the independent power producers. Do you think this liquidity support facility arrangement from the African Trade Insurance would help in attracting investment to the sector because it ensures or guarantees timely payments from the Ethiopian electric power?
It could be, but I think EEU is the utility company, the distributor. The off-taker is EEP, Ethiopian Electric Power. So any IPPs, independent power producers, will be signing an agreement or a power purchase agreement with EEP. So these mechanisms are important. There's also MIGA that provides political risk insurance for private sector companies that invest in the power sector. The payment insurance is also very important that you mentioned. But again, I come back to the fundamental, right? Like what brings these companies to come to Ethiopia? They have to see their costs lower than their profit. So someone needs to buy electricity from them for more than they're making it. Until we fix that problem, having all these mechanisms is nice, of course. I think it's a good step. Then we're going to struggle because then you'll have to have Ministry of Finance provide sovereign guarantee because, if EEP is not selling it commercially viably, then there is a risk that it may not be able to pay for the for the electricity that it's buying. So we have to really get out of this sovereign guarantee schemes because they're not sustainable. You know, we have lots of other critical projects that may require that sovereign guarantee, especially related to health and other important projects in the country. So really holding that reserve for the critical issues, and then moving towards like really reforming the tariff, like I said, is really the most important. So that way you have a market. You've created a market because you have a buyer that's viable. You have a seller that can sell. They will negotiate. It becomes trade. And then, the buyer can have all these other mechanisms that's been, the National Bank is allowing the offshore accounts, and the insurance mechanisms, political risk, all the others will come because energy is globally is the most profitable sector. Here it's not yet. So, like I said, reforming the tariff and the tariff structure is really the most critical part.
Yes, the tariff reforms are very critical, but in the projects that I was previously involved in, one of the major challenges that the investors and the financiers mainly were raising was that EAP was earning its income in very local currency, and there was a real challenge for EAP to settle the payments in foreign currency, and the government is also suffering from these forex issues. That was one of the reasons why this new directive has been enacted by the National Bank, so that the financiers especially can engage in financing of these large-scale and medium-scale renewable energy projects. I wanted you to hear your views about to what extent these forex issues have impacted the success of the renewable energy projects, in addition to the tariff issues that we've discussed and which I agree are very important.
Yeah, FX is definitely an issue. Like I said, we have a significant trade deficit, so dollars scarce, and that's because of that we see the annual inflation of the birr, which also puts risk on some of these debt servicing, right? If what you're collecting when it converts to FX is a lot less than it was last year, then it's a risk. So the steps that have been taken over the last year and a half, the macro reform, have been incredible, have been really good. The liberalization of the FX, allowing the offshore accounts and whatnot. But again, I think this is why I come back to my earlier conversation. If we can make 70% of our workforce more productive, if we can start really exporting and doing agro-processing, and if we can increase our coffee exports by twofold, that gives us another 3 billion, right? And I think the reform makes that attractive, right? Because the birr is devalued. The devaluation helps the cost basis to be lower. So when you export, it makes some of our produce very attractive. But we have to move fast. And that's why investing in some of these infrastructures, the farming infrastructures, irrigation infrastructure, is really important. Because that will help you on the other side. Because your macro becomes stable. You will solve all these FX issues that you're talking about. You can do mega projects at that point. Because you have the FX base that doesn't require all these guarantees, all these instruments, right? Because, I go to the bank and get the FX, and then so that way, even eventually, there could be more off-takers. Could be transmission companies that could do their own transmission. Distribution companies that come. It doesn't have to always stay a monopoly. It's not like that in other countries, and I think. So these issues are also holding the power sector from being liberalized because there's only one player. or two players, EP and EU. So we cannot serve 130 million people with two companies. It's very difficult. So having all these different players will actually help with competition. It brings in, eventually it will bring down price. The reform itself will bring down price because there will be competition across the board.
Until we resolve this macroeconomic issue, and it could also be unrealistic for the government to give sovereign guarantee for every project. I understand that it could be very early to say that the MOU could incorporate political risk insurance as part of the guarantee arrangement that the Africa Trade Insurance Agency provides. But do you think that might help again in attracting investors to the sector, because political risk insurance would cover currency convertibility issues for renewable energy sector projects? Do you think it could give an interim solution for medium-scale projects until we get these macroeconomic issues resolved?
Absolutely. Political risk insurance is very important because that protects them from any unforeseen issues that may occur within the country. Definitely, but I think, again, I come back to, can they sell the electricity at the price EEP can afford to purchase it? That's always the question, right? And I think, would EEP agree to purchase that electricity? Why would they purchase at 5, 6, 7 cents per kilowatt hour when they can generate it for 1 or 2 cents? It's just pure economics, right? So, yes, definitely these mechanisms, whether it's political risk insurance, payment guarantees, the offshore accounts, all these are important. And I think they're the right tools to help support the private sector to invest. But again, I think the biggest issue is this dichotomy of how much I'm selling it and then how much the buyer can buy or is willing to buy. Because if we don't create a market, it's not going to work.
If you're talking about energy, of course, we should also be discussing about the GERD project, Africa's largest hydroelectricity power project. We've heard that it has completed its final and fifth filling of reservoir in October 2024, and it's going to be fully operational by late 2025. We expect that this will address a chronic electricity shortage in the country. How can you please tell us more about the impacts that the GERD will have in the country's electrification and positioning Ethiopia as a regional power hub?
GERD is huge for the country. Ethiopia's installed capacity was around 3,000 megawatts before GERD. And it's going to effectively triple just by bringing GERD from 3 to close to 8 to 9 gigawatts of installed capacity. It's very significant. I think it will help. Definitely, we will see a significant change in our energy, which we were already seeing, by the way. If you can see, like, our load, our demand has dramatically increased, specifically with industries coming up, the advent of electric vehicles. If you look at electric vehicles, for example, an average electric vehicle will take anywhere 50 to 60 kilowatt hours for maybe like 2 days, 3 days. Our consumption, total consumption, was about, I think, anywhere from 100 to 200 kilowatt hours for a month, right? We're going to be consuming that in a few days now. So the demand has almost gone up exponentially. But the grid is sustaining it. You don't see a lot of power cuts. So the modernization and rehabilitation is really timely and critical. If that was not done, we will have lots of blackouts. The capacity has been increased, and also you also have to have the energy, right? You cannot deliver something that you don't have, and I think that it's been quite timely, the rehabilitation, especially on the distribution side, and also the GERD completion and coming online. So definitely it's quite significant, but it's not enough. We have one of the lowest installed capacity per capita. We have 130 million people, about 6,000 megawatts installed capacity, which will, GERD is fully on board, about 9 to 10 megawatts. Still quite low, right? I don't want to compare with the developed world, but, China has 3,400 gigawatts of installed capacity. We're at 6. So you can see the difference there, right? Of course, they have a lot more population. They're economically much more advanced. But, your investment in installed capacity, or your installed capacity, like I said in the beginning, is directly proportional to your economic activity or your GDP, effectively. So we have to really invest more. We have lots of renewable energy resources. We need to start getting them on the grid.
Thank you. Nuclear energy, given the country's energy demand and resource mix, do you think nuclear energy would be a strategic and sustainable solution for the country's long-term power generation portfolio? And how do you compare this with other baseload options such as hydro or geothermal in terms of investment cost, operational risks, and also long-term viability?
Yeah, definitely. Nuclear can be a very good option. It's a base load, similar to the geothermal. It's debatable. It's also renewable, right? It's a renewable resource. But the safety and risk is really the biggest issue. About Fukushima issue in Japan that created significant problems. So the question is, does Ethiopia have the right infrastructure to implement that safety mechanism? And that also makes nuclear energy quite expensive. There's global regulations that we have to abide by. Nuclear is also political. Are you enriching this and this for weapons and so on and so forth? So I think before we get to nuclear, this is my opinion again. I don't speak on behalf of policies of the government or whatnot. I think we have a lot of untouched areas like solar, wind, geothermal. And not a lot of countries have geothermal, for example. We have plenty of it. We can start developing that. So I think it's good to start the program, at least. How do we get certified? What are the capacities that are required to bring a nuclear on board? I think that can be started. But in terms of implementing, I think we have tons of other sources that the other world doesn't have that we could focus on and prioritize.
Thank you so much, Hizkyas. If there are any perspectives or insights that you would like to talk about the energy reforms, the opportunities and challenges in Ethiopia, and if you have any message to convey to the investors and stakeholders who are already engaged or are planning to be engaged in the energy sector in Ethiopia.
My message is really invest in areas that we think are already commercially viable. I think transportation is one of them. Agriculture is another one. Until we get to a level where there is an energy market in Ethiopia for people to invest in. But specifically, I'd like to encourage local investors, come talk to us. I think there's a huge opportunity to invest in agricultural productivity or the energy agricultural nexus because we think that's the biggest pie, to say, the biggest opportunity for people to come and invest viably, commercially viably. And when we have an energy sector, an energy market, then that opportunity also presents itself. This will be a good gateway. Investing. These are also a lot more smaller investments, right? You're building a solar system for a 50-hectare irrigation scheme that may be like 100 kilowatts or something. You're not building, 100 megawatt plant. There's a lot much more scale, and we can create some of these mechanisms for de-risking. Make sure the off-takers are going to be organized in a way that is, legally, the legal framework would be there. There will be an obligation from both sides, and so on and so forth. So we think that's the biggest opportunity, and then in terms of commercially viably, without having all these guarantees here, guarantees there, which delay projects, and also delays another huge cost. Companies invest. I know the geothermal companies have invested anywhere from 5 to 10 years trying to get one project closed. It's quite a long time. So that's my message. But I'd like to encourage local investors first, and then that will give confidence to the foreign investors to come, because we'll have a showcase. We'll have something now to showcase here.
Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing with us insightful perspectives on the energy sector. Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate it.